So in example 2, we're going to look at a more advanced swing blues harmony. And in this one, we're going to look at key transitions within a 12-bar blues that we should be aware of and we should start to collect ideas for. Certain measures that lead into certain changes. We're going to identify them and lock in on them and analyze certain transitional chord segues in there. So without further ado, let's dive into this one. It's similar to the first. It's still in the key of B flat, but we're going to get a little more advanced with it. So let's demo it, and I'll talk through it. So in this one, we start out very similar to the first one with this B flat major 6 triad. And I should say something. There is dampening of the A string on a lot of these Freddie Green chords. So we don't hear the A string, but we're strumming the whole, all the way down the guitar. And we don't hear the top 3 strings because they're dampened by our pinky. So that's why you can kind of get these big full strums. You got to have that dampening in there. So that's one key aspect of this. So we start the same. Into the 4 chord, just the same. 3rd measure back to the B flat major 6th. 4th measure, the dominant 7. Okay, so now we're going to a dominant 7 in the 4th measure, and this is a really key kind of idea to take note of. The going to a dominant 7 from a major chord in that 4th measure sets up that 4 chord really nicely in terms of voice leading. So let's look at that for a second. So whereas the B flat major 6 has one note that changes, it goes from the major 3rd to the dominant 7 of the 4 chord. Now thinking relationally to the 4 chord, right? We have the major 3rd of the 1. That's the movement. It moves a half step down and becomes the dominant 7 of the 4 chord. What's nice about the dominant 7 is, particularly in this Freddie Green shape, is that you have 2 notes moving and 2 key transitional notes. So you have the dominant 7 of the 1 and the major 3rd of the 1 becoming the major 3rd and the dominant 7 of the 4. Okay, so obviously 3rd and 7s are the kind of key chord tones, so it really sets up this change really sweetly, And these Freddie Green chords are good for sort of this mid-tempo style, but we should also take note of these little fragments, You can work a whole blues with just the top half of the chord, okay? So that B flat 7 as we approach the 4 chord is one of those sort of key concepts that I'd like us to kind of take note of. We're going to point out some other ones in this one. So after that, we lead into the 4. We have 2 measures of the 4 chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. Back to the 1 chord on the 7th measure. And then we have this little movement setting up our turnaround, our 2-5-1 turnaround. So here's another key transitional element. In a regular 12-bar blues, the 7th and 8th measure is typically just either, if it's a shuffle, we're just here, playing on the 1 chord. In a jazz or, a more complex harmony blues or swing blues, we can create motion. You know, we're rather than staying necessarily on the one chord, we can kind of create motion that leads us into the turnaround. And one of these concepts that players use a lot is a substitution called a 1-6-2-5 or a 3-6-2-5, and a 1-6-2-5 being okay, or a 3-6-2-5 being and these sounds are probably very familiar because they're the basis of thousands of popular songs in modern music, from Gershwin's I Got Rhythm to Chopsticks on the piano to everything. They've been in, you know, countless songs, these two progressions. So, so what they are essentially loops back to the one in some sense. So with the 1-6-2-5, we already know 2-5 is part of it, right? 2-5, and then implied we're going back to the one. So it's 1-6, and then we have 2-5-1, which is we already covered in the first lesson. 2-5-1 is our turnaround. So now in this case, we're playing in the 7th measure. We've just come back from the 4 chord, right? 6th measure, second. Here's the 2nd measure of the 4 chord. We're back to the 1. We stay there for 1 measure. And then rather than staying there for a 2nd measure, we say, hey, let's sub out this 1 chord for a minor 3, which is a D minor 7. So essentially just like our 2 chord, but up 2 frets. And that D minor 7 is right within the major scale of B flat. So that's why it's the 3. And so it basically is subbing out as a B flat into our 6. Now, this is a dominant 6. This is a G7, much like our 5, you know, in F. It's the same shape, just up 2 frets. So we're going from here, 2 beats, here to the dominant 6. A classic 1-6-2-5 or 3-6-2-5 has a minor 6. But these chords are very forgiving, and I personally like the dominant there, leading, in this case, leading into the 2-5-1. So it's totally fine to do a dominant there. So that's what we have there, this motion, setting up, creating tension, creating flow into our 2-5-1. And then a quick 1-6-2-5, 2 beats on each chord. 1, 6, 2, 5, 1 for the final tag turnaround, 11th and 12th measures. Okay, so in this lesson, in this exercise, we covered some key concepts. 1, setting up some really nice voice leading to the 4 by really locking in on a dominant 7 before that change happens. We talked about the concept of transitional chords in the 7th and 8th measure of a blues, and we're going to talk a lot about this in this course. And we looked at the concept of a 1-6-2-5 or a 3-6-2-5 as possible transitionary elements in that 7th and 8th measure. And we also looked at, rather than a very simplistic 11th and 12th measure like we did in the first exercise, adding another 1-6-2-5 as a secondary turnaround in that last little section versus, say, 1 measure of the 1 and 1 measure of the 5. So those are some key concepts. We're going to get more advanced as we go and give you more colors and textures to paint with. In this next exercise, we're going to look at some chromatic approaches to chords in half-step increments. So let's dive right in.